well, I was only a young captain, and he introduced me to Jackie Cochran. She took me to a general's dining room and barged in, like she owned the damn place. And here I'm a little lowly captain, all these generals are glaring at me, and I said, geez, what do you do? That's the first time I got exposed to Jackie Cochran, and she was a piece of work, I'll tell you.
The cliché rags to riches accurately describes the life of Jacqueline Cochran. Born into crushing poverty and orphaned shortly after, not even Jackie knew her true age. Armed with not so much as a birth certificate, Jackie took on the world and won, setting more flying records than anyone since, male or female, and going on to become the first woman to fly faster than the speed of sound. Prior to her record-setting flight, Jackie formed a successful cosmetics company, married an American millionaire, founded the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, known as the WASPs, convinced General Eisenhower to run for president, and pushed for the early testing of women to become astronauts, any one of which would have been an impressive accomplishment for a single lifetime. None of these, however, compared to Jackie's stellar career as a pilot and her many record-setting achievements. No one, except perhaps Jackie, would have ever believed the little orphan girl from Florida could go on to log such an impressive array of accomplishments. But to fully understand just how far she came, it is first necessary to understand just where she came from.
Jackie Cochran was born in and orphaned at birth, and she was born into a life of incredible poverty. When she was a child, there were times in her life where she was too poor to even own a pair of shoes.
Some of Jackie's earliest memories include an unshakable determination to free herself from the grinding poverty that surrounded her. When Jackie was 11, she apprenticed herself to a hairdresser and began sweeping floors and shampooing hair. By the time she was 14, she had selected her name, Jacqueline Cochran. She selected it out of a telephone book and fully trained herself as a hairdresser, then set out to win her fortune. Unbeknownst to Jackie at the time, her decision to become a hairdresser would provide her the opportunity to conquer poverty and propel her toward her flying destiny.
She then went on to start and found her own cosmetics company, Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetic Company, which proved to be extremely successful. And then Peggy Rex, a very wealthy woman, was employing Jackie as her hairdresser. And she was having a very nice dinner party one night, and one of the female guests was not able to attend, and that was to be Floyd Odlum's dinner guest.
The son of a small-town minister, Floyd Odlum was a self-made man in the truest sense. Putting himself through law school, he eventually became the chief executive officer of General Dynamics, as well as the owner of many other companies, including the radio station RKO. In addition to amassing his own multi-million-dollar fortune, Odlum was financial advisor to many of the era's richest men, including Howard Hughes.
So Peggy called Jackie Cochran up and said that she would supply Jackie with a lovely evening gown if Jackie would agree to be Floyd Odlum's dinner partner that night. So Jackie accepted, was seated next to Floyd Odlum, and that was the beginning of a very long and wonderful relationship.
It was Floyd who first suggested that Jackie learn how to fly in order to help her cosmetics business to grow nationwide. So, in the summer of 1932, on a $495 bet, the cost of 20 hours of flight time, Odlum waged that she could not get her pilot's license in 6 weeks, but she did it in 3. From that moment on, Jackie commandeered the controls, took to the sky, and never looked back. Jackie and Floyd got married shortly after.
I soloed the first time in 1932, and I had never seen an airplane on the ground until Saturday morning, and I soloed Monday morning.
Soon after receiving her flying license, Jackie took an interest in air racing competitions.
She entered the first Bendix air race in 1935, and although she did not win, she was the first woman to ever enter a previously all-male air race competition. By 1938, Jackie won that race, which just goes to show you the tenacity and the determination that that woman had.
On March 24, 1939, Jackie established a national altitude record for women. And in September 1939, she broke the international open-class speed record for both men and women. In 1940, she went on to break the 2,000-kilometer international speed record and the 100-kilometer national record. The next year, Jackie became the first woman to pilot a bomber across the North Atlantic. Jackie was one of the early members of the 99s, the organization of pioneering female aviators that first came together in 1929 to coordinate the interests of women in the aviation field. Eventually, their ranks grew to 99 members. Amelia Earhart, who went on to become the club's illustrious first president, suggested that the group be named the 99s for the number of charter members at the time. Jackie was voted president of the group for the years 1941 through 1943. Just prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Jackie and her 99s pledged their aviation services to the military for whatever crisis that lay ahead. Seemingly overnight, the opportunity to serve the country in a time of war became a reality.
I went to England in 1941. And the reason I got to fly to England, General Arnold called me one day and he said, "Jackie, how would you like to fly some bombers to England?" And I said, "I'd be delighted, roll them out." Then the British asked me if I could recruit some women pilots. And I recruited 40 actually, and 25 made the grade. General Arnold came over in June 1942 and said, "How about coming home and training a bunch of women?"
I've been flying for 9 years, and it's always been as a sporting event with me and for my own entertainment. For once, I've done something that I feel is a contribution to a cause that I'm in sympathy with Great Britain.
Jackie took the American contingency, dubbed the Pilots to Britain, overseas to fly as part of the Air Transport Auxiliary. When Jackie returned from England in 1942, she immediately put the first Women's Air Force Service Pilots class into full swing. By July 1943, Jackie was appointed to the General Staff of the U.S. Army Air Forces and directed all phases of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots program, or the WASPs as they came to be known.
Graduation day, and the entire school turns out to pay tribute to this, the 6th graduating class. On the reviewing stand is General Isaiah Davies, Commanding General of the 34th Flying Training Wing, and Miss Jacqueline Cochran, America's #1 feminine flyer. Following the review, the graduates are congratulated by General Davies for their 6 months' work. He tells them that we have lost more men in the skies of Europe than in the entire Sicilian campaign, and that the Air Force needs their services badly to replace flyers who have left for frontline duty. Afterwards, Miss Cochran, National Director of Women Pilots and Special Assistant on the General Staff of the Army Air Forces, stresses the tremendous responsibility each graduate has to the Air Forces and to the girls who will follow them. As long as they work well, the job of training women pilots will go forward. Miss Cochran, more than anyone in the Army, is responsible for what is taking place. For it was she who first envisioned the use of women pilots and the need for the school, and by her initiative and enterprise turned it into a reality. Today, She divides her time between the Pentagon and Washington, Avenger Field, and the various bases where the WASPs are stationed for operational work.
She was really encouraging, and you know, for anybody flying, but particularly for women in flying, she really wanted to push them, and she did. Without her, I never would have been able to fly when I did, which the timing was excellent. And had I not learned to fly when I did, I wouldn't have been able to go into the WASP.
Jackie wisely used the shortage of male pilots during the war to the women's advantage.
I was on what was known as special assignment, and that was a group of 25 girls from my class and 25 girls from the class ahead of me, a month ahead. And then the 50 of us were divided into 3 groups and went to B-17 school, B-26 school, and C-60 school.
Through Jackie's leadership, the WASPs forever dispelled the misconception that male strength was necessary to pilot aircraft.
She had a goal, and that was for women to fly military airplanes. And she was probably relentless pursuing it. And she had to convince the right people, and so she did finally convince Hap Arnold that women can fly.
The WASPs flew the giant B-29s and towed targets for anti-aircraft training.
We were the first ones in the big airplanes, and we couldn't even tell our parents what we were flying.
They flew searchlights at night, simulated strafing missions, laid smoke screens, and flew photographic and radio-controlled missions.
During the WASP, that was business, and she was at the bases on business, and she would talk to us, but more than anything, she was there to find out if we were doing the job and how we were doing it. She knew exactly what we were doing, and I know that she was proud of what we were doing.
In the first year alone, the women pilots set a new safety record in military aviation, flying the equivalent of 3 million miles for each fatal accident. This rate was 2% less than that of the overall fatality rate in the United States for male Air Force pilots.
They did an excellent job. They were very good pilots. But at the end of the war, they were thanked for their services and they were let go. And from that point, there were no women pilots in the military until the mid-1970s.
After the war, Jackie continued to participate in air races, establishing new transcontinental and international records. From her ranch in Indio, California that she shared with her husband Floyd, Jackie ventured into the political arena. It has been said that it was Jackie who suggested to Dwight Eisenhower that he run for president of the United States. And it wasn't too long after Jackie's rumored insistence that he did just that.
She said, I think he's the most likely candidate that we have. And she said, he doesn't even want to consider it. And she said, I'm going over and tell him that we've got the political backing to make it happen. And she did, and she was successful.
Eventually, Jackie became known for entertaining high-profile people at the ranch in Indio.
She never used General Eisenhower for anything. She had great respect for him, even when he was president, even after he was president. When he used to come down to the ranch and live in the guest house and wrote his book. And he enjoyed that environment because, you know, her place was beautiful, and it was nice.
Gosh, the list would go on and on. But ambassadors, you know, people from all walks of life, and again, some of the most affluent people in the world. I've been sitting there visiting with Floyd, and the phone would ring, and it was Howard Hughes consulting with him on some enterprise he wanted to get involved in.
A lot of Jackie's power did come from Floyd Odlum because of the wealth that he brought to that relationship. And Jackie did use that to further her goals and her aims and to further her position. She had no qualms about flaunting her power.
They had something going on all the time. Skeet shooting, horseback riding, or golfing, tennis. There's always some activity.
Jackie's interest in flying only continued to grow. By the early 1950s, women were starting to fly and set records in jets. Jackie was eager to get in on the action.
Jacqueline Cochran of France became the first woman to establish the speed record in jet aircraft. I think Jackie was driven half out of her mind. She couldn't stand it that Jacqueline Cochran was one ahead of her. But there were no jet airplanes that she could fly in the United States. So her husband Floyd achieved enough ownership of the Canadian licensee for the manufacture of the F-86 that he had his wife hired as a test pilot for the Canadian manufacturer of the F-86.
Floyd Odlum owns Canadair, and they build F-86s, and Jackie wants to fly F-86s. Floyd Odlum calls the CEO and said, "Hey, Mike, you work for me, you'll do as I tell you." And it's not that direct, of course, but basically that's the way it's done.
I do know that Jackie Cochran's reputation was one of being a woman who was tough as nails and determined, and that no one would get in her way, and that she was a steamroller. If you did get in her way, that she would steamroll over you.
Determined to set world records in the U.S. with a jet, Jackie set her sights on her biggest goal, to be the first woman to break the sound barrier. The only coach she ever allowed to assist her was the first man to ever achieve this success, Chuck Yeager. At that time, he was testing experimental jets here at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California.
I think Jackie chose Edwards Air Force Base as the base for doing so many of her record flights, both in early 1950s and early 1960s again. This is where the action is. This is where the nation's flight testing is accomplished. You have a 12-mile long runway in case things go wrong, and you have flying weather where you can fly 360 days of the year.
The Air Force had its own way of doing things in that day, and there were buddy-buddy people at Edwards, and Jackie Cochran was in that loop. And the generals and Jackie got along very well, and her husband bought her the rides.
The Air Force was also aware that Yeager was the man, the only man for the job. Jackie's reputation for being fiercely independent and outspoken was very well known. No one at Edwards was eager to take responsibility for her training and attempt at the sound barrier. With Yeager in charge, however, it was believed that Jackie could at least be managed.
The first flight that was scheduled, Jackie showed up more than an hour late on the flight line, and Chuck Yeager met her at her car and said, "We're not flying today. I told you to be on time, and if you can't be on time, then this project is over." After that, Jackie was never late one more time, and all the time she flew with Yeager.
When she got involved with the F-86, and before she could get in the F-86 to set records, and she had to learn to fly jets, so that fell on my back to check her out in T-33s, learned how to taxi a jet, how to fly a jet, and then it's a little different from prop airplanes. She was a good pilot and made excellent landings, and she learned very fast.
You talk to General Yeager, when you read the notes that he took during her record flights when they were here at Edwards, he kept in effect a daily flight log. And in it, he spoke the truth, exactly, straightforward, as Yeager always did and still does. And there, he very brutally analyzes her flying, and he respected it. He said, you know, she did very good today, landed just a little long, but handled the plane well. Flew an ideal pattern today. And it's very obvious all the way through that he respected her flying skills. This is what it takes to get along with Chuck Yeager.
The military was very, very concerned that a tragedy did not occur and that there would be an accident and Jackie would be killed. That would be catastrophic for Jackie and her family, and also catastrophic for the Air Force. And also it would have been catastrophic for women entering the military and being jet pilots, because the publicity fallout from that would have been terrible. Jackie had to agree to pay for her own personal liability insurance for each and every flight she took. That was at a cost in 1953 of $10,000 per flight.
The Air Force began to get progressively more nervous about Jackie's flights and her imminent shot at breaking the sound barrier.
General Doolittle came down to Jackie's ranch, and after I'd been flying with her for about 4 or 5 times in a T-33, he sat me down, you know, and said, "Do you think Jackie can hack this program? Because we don't want the Air Force embarrassed, you know, if something happens to her." And I said, "Hell, she's a good pilot, General." I said, "I think she can hack it." And said, "Well, okay, the monkey's on your back, buddy." Yes, sir. And she did very good. She's a good pilot, excellent pilot. Hell, she's as good as a lot of guys out there.
You have a challenge when you go out, and there's certainly some programs you're on, and you know there's a real high risk factor involved. And I have to tell you the truth, you end up with a little concern, you know. You're wondering how the day's going to pan out. And especially when you've seen as many people clobbered as I have. You think about Edwards Air Force Base, every street up there is named after a dead test pilot except one, and that's Yeager Boulevard.
That day finally came when both coach and student agreed it was time to chase down the sound barrier.
I think it was her 6th or 7th flight in the F-86, and I've been training her, you know, getting her up. The airplane would do 0.9 Mach straight and level. Well, you know, and then I've been increasing her speed up to higher and higher. And I explained everything, what happens. You know, it's really nothing. If you put a dummy in an airplane and fly it above Mach 1, as long as you know what you're doing. And so we took her up to 45,000 feet, and then her problem was Jackie didn't live on her back like fighter pilots do. You know, inverted. And I said, "Jackie, you know, we won't roll the airplane over and pull it and go straight in. We're going to push it over and get it in about a 60-degree climb angle, leave the power up, and you get in a little bit of buffeting, and then as we go through 20,000 feet, we pull the airplane out, and we'll make sonic boom. So we'll get above, you know, we'll get up to Mach 1.
She was working that close to the feathered edge of not surviving, because we did lose some airplanes that way.
She did as she was told. I was just sitting back watching her and flying her wings. She did everything she was told to do.
Most of the test pilots have a master's or a doctorate before they even go into test flying. And here was Jackie with not even a high school diploma, and she was flying high-performance jets. She must have been an extremely intelligent woman to be able to accomplish that and not kill herself.
Using a Canadian-built Saberjet F-86, Jackie became the first woman to break the sound barrier. She later said that she felt as though she were flying inside an explosion, and that while she could hear and respond to Yeager's commands, she could not hear the sound of her plane.
Well, you don't jump out of the airplane, jump up and down, scream and holler, and like that stupid movie, The Memphis Belle. Jesus, that's not the way it's done. You know, she was a professional, and when she got the airplane above Mach 1, we landed, and I said, "Hey, you did a good job." And she said, "Well, thank you very much." That was it.
Well, I'm very happy that I've been able to make a jet record. I've made many records in reciprocating airplanes, and so to get 652 miles an hour and break the old record by 18 miles is pretty satisfying. I'm also very happy to have been the first woman to go through the sound barrier, the sonic barrier, and also to do this in company with the first man.
For as well as she related to and worked with Yeager and other men, Jackie just never seemed to get along well with many other women.
My impression of her is more that she was friendly enough, but unless you had something that would help her or further some of her goals, you weren't a bosom buddy. I don't know how else to put it.
Jackie Cochran was an incredible overachiever. Every human relationship she had, I think, was competitive. She couldn't talk to you 3 minutes without one-upping you one way or another. And this was particularly true in aviation.
A lot of women didn't really appreciate being around her very much because she was always talking about her accomplishments. Well, I didn't mind that at all because she had done it. And why shouldn't she talk about it? I thought, my gosh, that's wonderful. She has every right to talk about it. And I enjoyed hearing her tell of some of the things that she had done in flying.
Jackie especially never seemed to care for one woman in particular, Pancho Barnes. Pancho, also a pioneering aviatrix, had set earlier aviation records of her own, becoming the first woman to fly nearly 200 miles per hour in 1930. Pancho was perhaps best known for her outrageous personality, unfeminine appearance, foul language, and her ranch and bar, the Happy Bottom Riding Club that she operated near Edwards Air Force Base. The bar was depicted in the feature film The Right Stuff and catered to the likes of Chuck Yeager, Bob Hoover, and Jimmy Doolittle.
Jackie Cochran and Pancho Barnes were arch enemies. One of the reasons that Jackie and Pancho did not get along very well is that Pancho was always very contemptuous of Jackie's low birth and low social status. She always referred to Jackie as the swamp baby in a very demeaning manner.
Jackie was a lady. I never heard anything foul ever emit from her mouth. Pancho is embarrassing, you know. Even for me it was embarrassing. I think I've heard everything. Boy, she was a wild one. She was always as gracious as a person can be, and about as foul-mouthed as any human being you've ever met. Every other word was 4 letters.
They were two of the best pioneer women pilots in the world, and yet you could not put the two of those ladies together in the same room. They absolutely detested each other.
In the mid-1950s, Pancho's restaurant and bar burned to the ground, and behind me is all that remains. Within a few short years, Poncho's star had completely fallen, and she died penniless and alone. Jackie's star, however, was still on the rise, with her sights set on a brand new frontier for women: space. Jackie went on to become increasingly active in aerospace research throughout the 1950s. With the world's foremost authority on the subject, Randy Lovelace, a friend and colleague of Floyd's.
Floyd Odlum was actually the first chairman of the board of the Lovelace, the board of trustees of the Lovelace Medical Foundation when it was formed in 1947 because of his friendship with Randy. And a great deal of financial support came from that family.
He was a very prominent physician in aerospace medicine. He and Jackie worked together to design the first oxygen mask. And Jackie became a test pilot. That was her first test program, is when she took Dr. Randy Lovelace's design of the oxygen mask and flew up to 20,000 feet and successfully tested the first oxygen mask.
Upon the birth of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, otherwise known as NASA, neither the scientific ability nor facilities existed to medically test pilots for space adaptation. As a result, NASA chose to use the best aerospace facility in the country, the Lovelace Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where the selection and medical screening of test pilots to become the first astronauts in the Mercury program began. Based on his years of experience in the medical testing of pilots, Dr. Randy Lovelace was assisting NASA in profiling the ideal astronaut.
When we went through the early agonizing tests, one of the places we had to go was the Lovelace Clinic, and I continually say that's where all the sick doctors were with these very well patients. And they probed everything they could probe.
After hundreds of medical tests, 7 astronaut candidates emerged as the most qualified.
When the space program started, in 1959, it was going to be in a research environment. And there were only men pilots who had been experienced in research and development. There were no girl pilots that were qualified or had the background to get involved in space. Had there been, they would have done just as good a job as the men did. But they were not qualified. And it wasn't because there were women.
At the same time, while on a trip to the Soviet Union, Jackie learned that the Soviets were already training women parachutists to become cosmonauts. However, the same was not true in the U.S., as women were not among the Mercury ranks, because female pilots had not been tested. As a result, Jackie began a small but concentrated effort to get women tested for their suitability in space as part of an aerospace medical experiment.
Randy and Jackie and Mary and Floyd were frequently together, and they were fast friends. And when Jackie realized that there was increasing and real interest in candidates for the space program, naturally she thought, why not women? And I'm sure she became a burr under Randy Lovelace's shirt until he agreed to try.
Dr. Lovelace and Air Force Brigadier General Donald Flickinger eventually agreed, and women were put through identical tests that the men had undergone.
Jackie agreed to pay for the recruitment and the testing of female candidates. And I don't remember the names of the original 15 or 20 lady pilots who were brought here for examination. My recollection is that the women were equally qualified with the men candidates, and they were just as tough psychologically, and they were just as qualified physically as any of the male candidates. They were pilots, and they were women of very evident courage and very evident motivation. I'd say their motivation was just as powerful as that of the men candidates that we got to know.
One of the female pilots, Jerry Cobb, as well as others, tested very well in all of the Mercury 7 tests. Cobb went on to assist in the selection of 13 women, who became known as the Mercury 13. Lovelace surprised many people when he concluded that the women had tested better than the men, by having better reflexes and more efficient oxygen consumption, both of which are essential for space travel.
And then suddenly we hear about some people who went out to the Lovelace clinics and women. I think it was Jerry Cobb and some others. And they felt they were candidates for the space program. They were really, what they were doing was comparing their physiological being with the ones of us who had been through there. And someone, and I think it was some doctor, gave them the feeling that they were being candidates for the space program.
In spite of their outstanding test results, none of the women were ever given a chance to fly in space, even though the Soviets had proven that women could successfully handle space with the flight of their female cosmonaut, Valentina Tereshkova.
One had to be a graduate of an accredited college or university, have an engineering degree, had to be a graduate of test pilot school. And there were no women that were accepted in test pilot school at that point in time. So it was ludicrous for them to think they were eligible.
Somewhere along the line, NASA decided they had to take an official position, and the program was squelched. They could get no funding, and Jackie couldn't pay for it forever. And so this was an idea that Jackie Cochran had, that she convinced Randy Lovelace to come along with, and which died a premature death because the world wasn't ready for it.
Jackie's views at this time in 1959 that women had an equal place in space proved to be prophetic when Dr. Sally Ride became the first American woman in space years later in 1984, and when Colonel Eileen Collins became the first female shuttle commander in 1998. Jackie's setback in failing to see women become astronauts did not affect her flying. Throughout the early 1960s, she continued to fly jets and set dozens of records, including establishing 69 inter-city and straight-line distance records for Lockheed in a Jetstar aircraft. In the early 1960s, with Floyd Odlum on the board of directors of both Northrop and Lockheed, Jackie was able to test pilot the fastest jet fighter of the era, the F-104 Starfighter. Then, in mid-May 1964, while flying an F-104 just like this one, Jackie became the first woman to fly over Mach 2, which is twice the speed of sound.
Northrop hired her as a test pilot and paid her a salary, which she donated to the Air Force Association. But that makes it legal for her to fly airplanes that are being built for the military before they are delivered to the military. They belong to the company until they are delivered to the military. Jackie, as a company test pilot, flew them. Same way as the F-104. Lockheed hired her as a 104, and they were building F-104Gs, and she's smoking around at 2.2 Mach, and she had the capability of doing it.
In 1963, Jackie set the 15 to 25 kilometer course record in a Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, going over 1,200 miles per hour. That same year, she broke the 100 kilometer course record, again with a speed of over 1,200 miles per hour.
On the 104, I had 5 records, 3 one time and 2 another time, a year apart. And people think I've had a lot of time in the 104. I've had a total of, if I stretch my imagination, 50 hours with 5 records. And the fastest one was 1492, I think, or something. Anyway, I made one run that was 1507.
That next year, she began resetting her own records in Lockheed's F-104G Starfighter. For the 15 to 25 kilometer course, a record of over 1,400 miles per hour. For the 100 kilometer course, 1,300 miles per hour, and for the 500-kilometer course, over 1,100 miles per hour.
I couldn't really say exactly how many records she's accomplished or how many of them are still there, because there were so many. People look at aviation records and they tend to think, oh yes, they're in neat categories. The fastest plane, the highest altitude reached, the shortest time between 2 points. In actuality, there's an enormous number of records in the book if you start looking into it. Time to altitude records in different types of aircraft, speed records, informal speed records by jet, by piston engine, by multi-engine, by male, by female, to say nothing of all the point-to-point records.
You have to also realize that she was in her 50s when she broke the absolute speed record for women at 1,400 miles an hour in 1963. Air Force test pilots in their mid-50s were not flying high-performance flights like that.
Jackie, she was very much a lady. I mean, even, hell, it was really funny when, after she set the records in the F-104, they had a press conference. You know, she'd been smoking out the 2.2 Mach and 100-kilometer closed courses and 1525 at, more than 1,400 miles an hour. And then the ground control's calling her and she doesn't answer. And I said, if you'll get your binoculars and look out there, you'll see she doesn't have her helmet on. She's combing her hair. And the guy said, yeah, you're right. But when she got out of an airplane, she looked like she had stepped out of a hairdresser's shop, because she was that way. And
Ms. Cochran, on behalf of the Cadet Wing, and for your tremendous contributions to aviation, and also for the mementos which you have presented to our school, we'd like to present you with something that means a lot to us, and that's the Sabre Plaque Award.
Gentlemen, I've been very fortunate to have been given an opportunity to serve our nation on so many occasions. And long period during the war, as General Arnold was my boss. I can't talk today. These are two of the most important things that ever happened in my whole life. Thank you.
Jackie's life, however, started to tailspin during the mid-60s. Floyd wanted to finance a real estate venture for his son, Bruce. Bruce, however, eventually lost the money, and as a result, they were forced to sell the ranch. Though Jackie and Floyd were not ruined financially, the well was beginning to run dry. Jackie was devastated at having to sell the ranch. Bruce Odlum later committed suicide.
It was really a hard time, I think, for Jackie. And she ended up by not having the finances to do anything. She had a pacemaker, and she had 4 or 5 of them, and she had to quit flying, and then all of a sudden be almost housebound and not wanting to leave her husband that much, you know, and he couldn't be gone. It was probably just, to me, just probably, I feel like she just kind of gave up.
I think the last time I saw Jackie was at Jimmy Doolittle's 60th wedding anniversary. I went over and said, "Jackie, how are you?" And she looked at me like this. And I said, gave her my name. And then she said, "Oh, yeah. But then she didn't recognize some of the other people. And I felt that senility had taken over, or Alzheimer's, which nobody talked about back then. I guess she went downhill pretty quick after that.
Basically, Jackie you know, time has passed. You don't read a hell of a lot about the Wright brothers either today, you know? Or you don't read a lot about me, or who at the time it was, you know, good news, but today it's not news. And hell, if you're not on drugs and don't rape women between fights, the press isn't interested in you.
Jackie Cochran lived her life in a way that made achieving goals look easy. The truth is, she never took no for an answer. She persisted in the face of harsh adversity. Though she never finished high school, she read, listened, observed, and acted on her beliefs and her dreams. She believed in mental toughness, in hard work, and in God. As a result, she lived her dream and expanded the frontiers of aviation for everyone, men and women.
It's easy to say that Jackie Cochran accomplished a lot in the air in the question of records, distances flown, speeds she reached, all of the firsts that she did. This is all on paper. These are the records. Count the number of her trophies. They're phenomenal. I think probably what's more significant is that Jackie Cochran showed the way a woman could go. It's probably pat to say that she was an inspiration to the feminine gender, but she certainly was.
Some people felt that she was a prima donna, but she was a very shrewd woman. And I think any time in history when women open the doors for other women and make great strides, it's always a very powerful woman, a woman who's very ahead of her time. And these are mavericks.
There are women pilots in there that were role models for me also, as well as the men. The women Air Force service pilots who flew during World War II, they were civilians, but they flew as ferry pilots here in the United States to support the war effort while the men were overseas flying in combat. So they were by far my #1 role models.
It doesn't make any difference what the shape of your reproductive organ is. That's the kind of pilot you'll be. Jackie was good. She was as good as the guys were. And being a woman, that didn't make any difference.
At the time of her death on August 9, 1980, Jackie Cochran held more distance, altitude, and speed records than any pilot, alive or dead, male or female. She urged people onward and upward in pursuit of excellence, their dreams, and a better humanity. Though she never had children of her own, Jackie had a distinct message for the next generation of aviators. In Jackie's own words, she said, "Flex your mental muscles and get cracking under your own power. Derive emotional satisfaction from a good try, and then another, and still another if the first ones fail. If you will open up your power plants of vitality and energy, clean up your spark plugs of ambition and desires, and pour in the fuel of work, and still more work, you will be likely to go places and do things. I have seen most of the rest of the world, and what we have here in the United States, good, bad, and mediocre taken into account, is the best the world has to offer." Jackie Cochran not only secured a permanent seat for women at the tables of aviation and spaceflight, she set an example for people everywhere to dream big and reach for the stars.